Larry Bruce, thanks very much. Tom Yamas, we've got some actions on social media today.
Right, Facebook and Twitter as well both flagged the president's video that he released, and we were talking a short time ago about how this video probably maybe made things even worse, even though the president was trying to ask some of those rioters to leave. He starts with, the lie that the election was stolen, and now Facebook, the vice president of integrity, tweeting, "This is an emergency situation, and we are taking appropriate emergency measures, including moving President Trump's video. We will move it because of balance we believe it contributes to rather than diminishes the risk of ongoing violence." Journalists are corresponding advocating for Facebook, which states the violent protests in the Capitol today are a disgrace. We prohibit incitement and calls for violence on our platform. We are actively reviewing and removing any content that breaks these rules. So clearly Facebook and Twitter, which flagged the video, having major issues and major problems with the president's message, which was billed, as Kellyanne had told you, a message of peace and to leave. But clearly there were other messages, especially at the beginning of that video, that can be interpreted in a different way.
Well, that leads to another question. This has been speculated about. Once the president is no longer president, how long will his Twitter account stay active? If they're willing to take this kind of action as president of the United States, you can imagine they might take even more drastic action once he leaves office.
But it's never stopped, right, George? And it's one of his active hobbies is to communicate, especially with his supporters. He has one of the largest, if not the largest, following on social media, and he's not afraid to use it. He's not afraid to post, even if he does get taken down.
It's an essential governing political tool.
I mean, he owes part of his presidential victory to it. It was a microphone, those campaign rallies, and his Twitter account that got him so much attention. I want to be clear because some of these images that we're seeing the rioters taking these selfies with smiles on their faces inside the House chamber and the Senate chamber. We can't forget, a woman has been shot tonight, okay? A woman has been shot tonight. There was also chemical agents that were used on police. And from some of the videos we've seen, clearly they had tools and weapons to break in to Capitol Hill. So this was not sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was not a big joke. Let's take some selfies inside of Capitol Hill. This was a riot, and that's what we should call it. That's what we are calling it.
Well, we heard from the congressman from Oklahoma. Injured.
George, it's so bad. I mean, when I saw this, I couldn't believe it. The governor of New Jersey says that they've asked for help. So now state police in New Jersey are going to protect Washington, D.C. It's hard to believe.
Tom Yamas, thanks very much. Let me bring in Senator Jeff Merkley this afternoon. Senator, we showed that picture taken from the chain of the staffers protecting the Electoral College ballots. We're showing it again right there. Remarkable what had to be done.
Absolutely, because the Raiders with busted open, burned those ballots, and it is something sacred about that. Those ballots is solely the decision of the citizens of the United States on the election of the president. So, just tremendous appreciation to those staffers who smartly wrapped those boxes and did that today.
Tell us what you've been going through today, what you expect to happen next, Senator.
Well, we are hoping that the votes are secured, and hopefully what we'll do is in a short period of time, we'll be able to return to the Senate floor, continue the debate, hold the vote, and I just believe that it will be a very, very strong vote to reject the objections to the electoral votes from Arizona, which is what was being challenged. And as I've talked to a number of my Republican colleagues, I think there's a good possibility they will drop all additional objections for other states, and we will get these votes secured. These are objections that should never have happened because the responsibility we have under the Constitution to count the ballots, the only basis in law for challenging them is if they weren't properly certified or if they misrepresent the information that should have arrived in them. And there's absolutely no contention by those who spoke on the floor that either of those things were the case. This was really an effort to say if we can take these votes away from Biden, we can send the decision to the House of Representatives where Republicans can keep Trump in power. And in that sense, it was just an absolute version of a coup that you would expect in a basically some authoritarian nation without the strength of our traditions and our obligations to the Constitution.
Senator Merkley, we heard similar feelings from Senator Joe Manchin just moments ago, saying he thought that several of the colleagues who were bringing objections were having second thoughts. Have they told you that directly, or is it still an uncertain situation?
What you running for? I put your beef in the box. That's a lunchable. Hey, I'm 2-1. I'm stopped on. Hey, I got 100 packs for my bandos. I'ma see that little blood spot until he not home. Bitch ain't nothing but you in your head. You got dropped on. She got ass and I'm running front. I ain't talking Mike Jack, but I wanna beat it. I ain't never do a Hail Mary, but I go to deep. He ain't never had a cell phone, but she calling Jesus. Hey, I'm in Sacramento. Where them niggas turn hard when they get a rental. They ain't really killing that. It be extra dumb. Niggas really soft, baby. Be a walking pillow. It's a Mary type game. Had a street with my street. The suckers kill my brother.
They need to basically
Get close to the words of the prophets.
to the mob. They need to inform and disperse it.
Moses told his
And so
people.
what we saw today
But my God shall supply all your need
of
according to his riches in glory by Christ
to
Jesus.
carry the responsibility
Philippians
of
4,
leadership
verse 9.
to say
God can
President
never
Trump
be
is
short of
wrong,
supplies. The
that
entire
there
earth
has been
and
integrity
all
in
that
these
is in it
elections,
belongs
that
to
it
him.
has been scrutinized
Psalms
by the state
24,
authorities,
verse 1.
it has been
The earth
reviewed
is the Lord's,
meticulously
and
by
all its
dozens of
fullness,
courts.
the world
This
and
election
those
stands,
who dwell
and that's
therein.
what we do in a
The
republic.
fact that we are in
We
need
stand
does
with a
not
peaceful
imply that
transfer
God has run
of
out of
power,
supplies.
not an effort
Some
by an authoritarian
Section
like
3
Trump
of the Book
to
of
hang
Enoch,
on to power
translated by
beyond
Robert
his
Henry
pocket.
Charles.
Senator Murphy, and this
This
was
book
only the
amongst
latest
recordings
example
in
of
the
that
public
kind of
domain.
enabling by
Chapters
the president's
17
supporters
through
over the
37.
last 4
Enoch's
years. How do
journey
you
through the
explain
earth
it?
and Sheol. Chapters 17 through 19.
There's going to be a
The
lot of
first
time
journey.
for us to
Chapter
try to analyze
17.
all that's gone wrong the
And they
last
took
4
and brought
years.
me to a place in which those who were there were like flaming
Fire.
fire. And when they would, and they brought me to a place of darkness, and to a mountain, the point of whose summit reached to heaven. And I saw the places of the luminaries, and the treasure.
And that's exactly what Trump set out to do. And I heard my colleagues over the years say, well, it won't get any worse, it'll get better, this will be the end of it. And then suddenly they find that they're hostage to their base, because their base has heard this message and inhaled it, come to accept it, come to believe in it. And suddenly they're worried about losing their elections and their primaries if they don't partner with this leader being President Trump. And at that point, they are enslaved or trapped by their own failure earlier on to stand up for justice, for stand up for the truth. And that's where we ended up. Senator Buckley, thank you for your time today. Good luck going forward. Good luck getting back to work tonight. We're glad you're safe. I want to go back to Martha Raddatz in Washington, D.C. It appears for now has been cleared. What's happening where you stand?
We just saw busloads of National Guard headed to the Capitol grounds, George. There have been 1,100 DC National Guard
Treasuries
called
of
up
the stars,
and
and of the thunder,
National
and
Guard
in the
from
uttermost
Virginia,
depths,
with the
where were a
FBI
fiery
officers
bow
actually
and
just
arrows, and
entered
there
George.
quivered,
They were
and a
walking
fiery
down
sword,
Constitution
and all the
Avenue,
lightnings.
and we just
And they
followed
took
them
me to the
here.
living waters, and to the fire of
Get
the
out of the
west,
way.
which receives every setting of the sun. And I came to a river of fire, in which the fire flows like water and discharges itself into the great sea towards the west. I saw the great rivers, and came to the great river, and to the great darkness, and went to the place where no flesh walks. I saw the mountains of the darkness of winter, and the place whence all the waters of the deep flow. I saw the mouths of all the rivers of the earth, and the mouth of the deep. Chapter 18. I saw the treasuries of all the winds. I saw how he had furnished with them the whole creation and the firm foundation of the earth. And I saw the cornerstone of the earth. I saw the four winds which bear the earth and the firmament of the heaven. And I saw how the winds stretched out the vaults of heaven, and have their station between heaven and earth. These are the pillars of the heaven. And I saw the winds of heaven, which turn and bring the circumference of the sun, and all the stars to their setting. I saw the winds on the earth carrying the clouds. I saw the paths of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of the heaven above. and I proceeded and saw a place which burns day and night, where there are 7 mountains of magnificent stones, 3 towards the east and 3 towards the south. And as for those towards the east, one was of colored stone, and one of pearl, and one of jacinth, and those towards the south of red stone. But the middle one reached to heaven like the throne of God of alabaster, and the summit of the throne was of sapphire. And I saw a flaming fire, and beyond these mountains is a region the end of the great earth. There the heavens were completed, and I saw a deep abyss with columns of heavenly fire, and among them I saw columns of fire fall, which were beyond measure alike, towards the height and towards the depth. And beyond that abyss I saw a place which had no firmament of the heaven above, and no firmly founded earth beneath it. There was no water upon it, and no birds, but it was a waste and horrible place. I saw there 7 stars like great burning mountains, and to me, when I inquired regarding them, the angel said, "This place is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the host of heaven. And the stars which roll over the fire are they which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in the beginning of their rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times. And he was wroth with them, and bound them till the time when their guilt should be consummated, even for 10,000.
A lot of those Trump supporters and those instigators as well still on the ground. Those are the people who were remaining there after a lot of the protesters we saw had walked away. Disappointed, by the way. They didn't really want to leave because they liked, they said, what had happened there today, and that they had a perfect right to do that. And this is clearly the hour they're going to start trying to move those who remain. I think one part of the Capitol, when you talk to Rachel Scott, obviously I haven't even seen her, she's so far away from me, but there's an area over on the other side that's cleared out. This side is definitely not cleared out yet. And I can't imagine they're just going to let these people leave. I mean, there's a curfew in the city. They're supposed to be inside. They're not supposed to be anywhere. So I don't know what they will do with those who remain, but I imagine they'll be numerous arrests here within the hour, George.
Thanks very much. I want to go back to Cecilia Vegas. Cecilia, the president doubling and tripling down. And now a new tweet just 2 minutes ago where he talks about an election victory unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots.
George, I've covered President Trump for 4 years, and I'm speechless by this. I mean, as we are looking at these images of what Martha just described as an appalling sight unfolding in our nation's capital, you've got the president who is tweeting. He says these are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. He tells them, go home with love and in peace. And then he says, remember this day forever. Yes, history is going to remember this day forever. There was no election that was unceremoniously and viciously stripped from anyone. This was a free and fair election, and it's pathetic that we have to keep saying that over and over. And you can't have it both ways, as we've heard from Republicans, from his allies, from people who are close to him, who have tried to get this message to the president that he is the one who started this, and he is the one who could stop it. If he went on television and he said outright, leave and go home peacefully. That is not what he has said. He has not called on this to stop, and he doesn't get to have it both ways here. And then you've got the flip, George. Listen to this absolutely stunning statement that I can't imagine I'm going to read from a former president of the United States, former President George W. Bush, who just released a statement that is worth reading in its entirety. He said, "This is how election results are disputed in a banana republic, not our democratic republic. I am appalled by the record-keeping of political leaders since the election and by the lack of respect shown today for our institutions, our traditions, and our law enforcement." And I think as we are in this evening and we are talking about what happens next there on the Capitol and whether they go forward with this vote to certify the election tonight, the Electoral College votes tonight, and we've got these questions for the 150 House members who said that they were going to object, and 13 Republican senators who were going to object. Where were they before tonight? Where were they if they are going to change their vote, if they're no longer going to object, as we're starting to hear potentially right now. Do they get off the hook for what we're seeing here tonight? If they were planning to object in their votes today, and we are here right now, are they at least partly to blame for what we are seeing in the Capitol as well?
Cecilia Vega, as you were talking, we also just got a new tweet from the president's national security advisor. Only 14 days to go in this presidency, but he has apparently broken with the president on this as well, saying, I spoke with Vice President Pence. He's a genuinely fine and decent man. He exhibited courage today as he did the Capitol on 9/11 as a congressman. I am proud to serve.
I'm sure it was my Netflix
a break of sorts, of course. The vice president was doing his constitutional duty.
He was doing his constitutional duty. That's his job. The president had been pressuring him privately. The president had been pressuring him publicly. But is it too late? I mean, does Mike Pence, does Robert O'Brien, do they get credit for today saying that they did what the Constitution requires them to do, or that Robert O'Brien supports what the vice president did because that's what he is supposed to do? This is the oath of office that the vice president took when he took it 4 years ago. Do they get the credit now for not having spoken up? The president has been spreading these baseless conspiracy theories, these bald-faced lies about an election being stolen from him for 9 weeks now. And they're just not true. Court after court around our country has declared that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. I laugh at myself for having to continually say this for the last 9 weeks. It's just the fact. But the president has been spreading these lies, these mistruths, and his aides, including Mike Pence and Robert O'Brien and people in the highest echelons of this administration, have stood by his side, and they have not spoken up. And so I think that there are serious questions for them as to whether they are part of what we're seeing here today as well.
Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. Terry Moran, Jonathan Greenblatt was on the program in our last hour saying that today's events are in some ways a bookend to Charlottesville, that those who are riding will look back for years as a great victory. President Trump said there were fine people on both sides in Charlottesville. The tweet 2 minutes ago praising great patriots.
And that is why, George, what happens in Congress over the next few hours is critical. This lie, a lie that the Attorney General of the United States appointed by Trump said there was no widespread fraud, that his own head of election security, all those courts, this lie must be put down, right? This notion that the Republicans were playing with fire, lies have consequences, as Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska told his colleagues today in a statement. And the consequences we've seen. An incident like that, like today's, can become a triumph for a right-wing, fascistic, anti-democratic movement if it is allowed to fester, if it is not put down. What Congress does tonight in affirming the victory of Joe Biden against lies and fantasies and sedition is absolutely critical. If they show weakness, it will be a triumph for the forces that want to essentially ignore the election, destroy the democracy, and install Donald Trump as permanent president. This is a very critical moment, not just because of the sad scenes that we've seen, but because of what it can represent. Movements that are anti-democratic take strength from their martyrs. They take strength from their battles. And unless there's a united front against it, it can be very dangerous going forward in our politics.
The question is, will that united front be developed? We're seeing the Capitol right now. It's a little after 6:10 on the East Coast. A curfew has gone into effect across Washington, D.C. after this extraordinary day of violence at the U.S. Capitol. The Capitol under siege. Rachel Scott, there in Washington, D.C. Have you noticed a significant difference in these last 10 minutes?
Any significant difference, George? We have now seen most of the demonstrators and protesters in this area clear out. We are now completely surrounded on this side of the Capitol by federal authorities and a very large police presence at this point. We just heard the second announcement go off over the intercom telling people to clear the area, that the curfew is now in full effect, and if they fail to do so, that they will be arrested. Just dramatic scenes playing out. We have been here for hours. As you know, I was in Georgia just yesterday. I was on a flight back to D.C. first thing this morning. In front of me were several rows of President Trump supporters that were coming here. They wanted to stand by him in this fight to overturn the results. This is normally an area where tourists come. This is normally an area where people come to see the United States Capitol. Today, it has turned into a scene of violent, intense clashes. We have watched media be attacked. We ourselves have been caught in some of these tense clashes with some of these demonstrators here. And of course, those images of that woman who was gushing out blood, appearing to have suffered from a tremendous wound here. Authorities have now taken back this area, George, but it took hours.
And they're hoping to get started on this debate tonight. Rachel, thank you. I want to talk to Congressman Jim Langevin now, Democrat of Rhode Island. Congressman, thank you for joining us tonight. Just tell us about your day as best you can. I assume you're clearly safe right now. Were you on the floor when this all unfolded? What did you learn?
I arrived on the Capitol complex this morning, getting ready for the proceedings to begin at 1 p.m., which they did. There were only 44 members that were on both sides of the aisle, House and Senate, allowed on the floor. So most of us have been watching the proceedings from our offices, and they've been rotating us in and out as the day went on. Then shortly around after 2 o'clock or so, we got word that protesters had stormed the Capitol and then started to try to, and then began to interfere with the proceedings of the House and the Senate. And then shortly after that, a couple of times, the House moved to recess, and then we were told to shelter in place. And so I've been here in my office with a couple of my staff members, and we've been here while the Capitol Police and the FBI and now the National Guard on the scene securing the Capitol complex.
We just got a tweet from your colleague, Congressman Clapper, Jim Clapper, the Democratic Majority Whip, who is quoted saying, "I have faced violent hatred before. I was not deterred then. I will not be deterred now. Tonight, Congress will continue the business of certifying the Electoral College votes." What more do you know about how this is all going to unfold tonight?
That's right. We have a constitutional responsibility, and we're going to fulfill that responsibility tonight. We've heard from our leadership that as soon as the Capitol Police and law enforcement have secured the Capitol complex once again, that proceedings of the joint session of the House and Senate to count the electoral votes will continue. That is our job, and I think it's important that we proceed tonight with that, no matter what time we have to resume. But we cannot allow this mob that stormed the Capitol, that borders on a coup attempt. It certainly is an assault on our democracy. We can't allow that to be the order of the day. We can't allow that to disrupt the work of the people and to interrupt this electoral vote count. We will count these electoral votes, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be declared the President and Vice President of the United States.
And do you expect that will get finished tonight? Do you think that some of your colleagues now are going to scale back their objections in the wake of this riot?
I hope that many of my colleagues are going to reflect on what happened today and understand how important it is not to do anything that's going to further incite violence. The time for protests and questioning the outcome of the election and the electoral vote count is over. That should have, and it has been done at the state level, and been certified. The election has been certified by election officials and Republican legislatures. Many times it's Republican legislatures that have certified these results. Our role in Congress right now is basically ceremonial, and for more than 200 years, every 4 years, the Congress meets in joint session, receives the electoral votes, we count those electoral votes that have been certified and sent to us, and that is the basic rule. This should not have happened today. It didn't have to happen, and I'm very disappointed in President Trump that he keeps perpetuating these lies, and it's like he keeps telling a lie over and over again. People start to believe it, and it really does. It incites violence. It incites these protesters, and it's just wrong. The president needs to come out and speak clearly and definitively for the protesters to stand down and let the work of the people continue.
I've spoken with several of your Democratic colleagues today who say that's an abuse of power. At least 2 are drawing up articles of impeachment. Congressman Jeffries, Hakeem Jeffries, the head of the caucus, said that everything is on the table right now. Is that something that should be considered in the name of accountability?
I think that in the name of accountability, everything should be on the table. But I'll say that we are 14 days away from January 20th. And on that day at noon, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be sworn in as the next president and vice president of the United States. That is a certainty. That outcome is not going to change. The people have spoken. The election results are in. For those people that don't like the results, there'll be an election in 4 years. But this election is over.
Congressman Langevin, thanks for your time today. Good luck tonight. Stay safe.
Thank you, George.
Tanya, I just want to pick up on what we were talking about with Cecilia just before we talked about the Congressman Robert O'Brien, now the National Security Advisor, praising Vice President Pence appearing to break at some level with President Trump. The group around him is fraying.
It is, and I'd be surprised if O'Brien has a job by the end of the week, because we've seen how the president acts so quickly in this time. You know, I'm a little concerned about Congress staying tonight, because if they are going to stay tonight, law enforcement is probably thinking, let's get through this as quickly as possible without these objections, because if they delay the process, it's only going to give the rioters more time to sort of regroup. And, George, you know, we started the day with an image that I thought was going to be the image of the day, which was Senator Ted Cruz when he stood up to object at first, and he got a standing ovation from several Republicans in the House chamber, and that's when the entire process started. It was just before the protest really took off, and it's incredible what's unfolded over the last 4 or 5 hours, and I have to think the Republican senators, the Republican members of the House that were going to object to this electoral college votes had no idea it was going to get this bad. Maybe some of them truly felt that there were inaccuracies in the elections, even though the courts have completely tossed any of that evidence out. There's been no evidence provided so far. But I wonder how much of this was politics being played, and because of that game, this is where we are right now.
Tom Yamas, Mary Bruce, it does appear that all the members of Congress we've spoken with are determined to. Excuse me, we lost Mary Bruce. I want to bring this to Rick Klein then, and said they do seem determined to get this done tonight for both symbolic and substantive reasons.
Yeah, I think there's a growing consensus among Democrats and Republicans that it's important to send that message, that the process goes on, that there was a political component to today's events. It was meant to disrupt the counting of electoral votes, and I think it's important for the senators and for the House members to be able to resume that count. We just saw a statement from Senator Mitt Romney, who, of course, thought none of this should be happening. He's calling for all those objections to be dropped, to make something close to unanimous, and we've been hearing from senators that they may at least drop some of the objections, curtail what would have been a long process anyway. In another world where this didn't happen, we'd still be going through those objections and might do it into the wee hours of tomorrow morning. Instead, I think there's going to be probably less debate around that. I have a hard time imagining everyone drops all the objections, but that sure would send a strong statement, given how the president continues to hang on to these false theories.
Let me bring that to Sarah Fagan. Sarah, we are seeing more Republicans stepping up, including Cecilia was reading the remarkable statement, the strong statement from former President George W. Bush, who, of course, you worked for as well. Based on what you've been hearing today, do you think the scaling back of the objections is going to actually occur? And do you think this has actually changed the minds and hearts of those who in the past have supported the president?
I don't know how I put it. This is a remarkably different situation than we were in 3 days ago. A person was shot today. People stormed the Capitol. They sat in the speaker's chair. I think the prudent thing for Republicans to do to make a statement would be to withdraw those objections. I understand the concerns. I share some of them. But we're in a very different place here, and that is the responsible thing for Republican members of Congress to do. I don't think they will all do it. Some of them are going to move forward. They're going to separate these actions from objections to the election process. But more and more senior Republicans, like my former boss who you just mentioned, are going to come out with incredibly strong statements. This is not reflective of the Republican Party. It's not. The Republican Party is a big tent. It's dominated by Trumpism right now. But it is certainly, I don't think any of us look at this and say that we want anything to do with this, anything at all.
But hasn't the story of the last 4 years been that this is Trump's Republican Party?
Well, I mean, certainly he remains the leader as the president, and he is certainly the dominant force of it. And, you know, we're at this critical period in the party, and where it goes remains to be seen. I think that the president did himself and his movement an incredible amount of harm today. You know, whether this is an inflection point and more mainstream should Republicans sort of take bigger roles in the party or not, I think remains to be seen. But I think most Republicans, including many Trump supporters and many strong Trump supporters, look at this and say they want nothing to do with this kind of behavior. It's not reflective of who they are. They have very strong views, but that doesn't mean that they want to see violence or people storming the U.S. Capitol.
Sarah Fagan, thanks. Let me bring that to Heidi Heitkamp. You served in the Senate, of course, as Democratic Senator from North Dakota. Is this an inflection point? Is this something on a par with what we saw in 9/11, this attack on the Capitol that will lead, at least for a time, to some unity?
Well, you heard Joe Manchin talk about that this is an opportunity for unity, and that when they all huddled together, they had an opportunity to visit. And I think that speaks well to kind of the camaraderie that people feel about going forward. And so hopefully this will, in fact, lead to some kind of healing of division.
We can only hope that, but it comes on the heels, Tom Yamas, of some very sad news. We've learned that the woman who was shot at the Capitol has died.
Yeah, maybe the most horrific image we've seen so far unfold today. A woman shot in the neck. We saw first responders trying to give her CPR, putting their hands on her neck wound. We've just learned that she has died. And George, we don't even know her name yet. We just know that she died in this senseless violence. And we have to ask ourselves, what did she die for? We don't even know. You know, we don't even know her name. And yet this woman has died. So this has gone way beyond just a simple protest. This was a riot through and through, senseless violence, and now the woman is dead.
Mary Bruce on Capitol Hill had to have shaken, and we've heard it in their voices all day long. Members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, the events of this day.
It absolutely has shaken them to the core, I think, because of course this goes way beyond politics and way beyond the usual bitter partisanship that's become, unfortunately, all too commonplace in Washington. To think that